Welcome everyone to this fourth episode of Every Move Explained, where we will see chess legend and former world chess champion Magnus Carlsen playing with the white pieces against Sipke Ernst with black. And this game begins with e4 by Magnus Carlsen, controlling the center of the board, allowing room for his bishop and queen to develop. And black responds with c6, the Carlsen defense. And so this move bolsters the d5 square, allowing black in the future to push to d5, where the c6 pawn will back up that d5 pawn move. And so here we have d4. As black did not fight for the center by putting a pawn on e5 or c5, white takes control of the center with both pawns placed 2 squares ahead of their king and queen, allowing plenty of room for his pieces and controlling many central squares. And black fights for the center by moving d5, attacking this e4 pawn. And here, white responds with knight to c3, attacking the center, but also protecting this central pawn on e4. And so we have an exchange in the middle. Black removes one of white's central pawns, and white captures. So here we have a position where white has more space in the center, and he has his knight developed. And so black attacks this knight in the center, developing his bishop to f5, and the knight is forced to either retreat or defend. But with this retreating move, now the knight attacks his former attacker. And so the bishop retreats, but remains on this diagonal, keeping an eye on these important central squares down through the middle of the board. And here we have h4. So this pawn move, it grabs space on the king side, but more importantly, it threatens to attack this bishop by pushing forward to h5. And so black makes an escape hatch for this bishop, so that once it is attacked here by this h-pawn, the bishop can retreat. And so white develops his king-knight, and this move controls the center, protects this central pawn. And now black also develops, moving his queenside knight, which may indicate a possible queenside castling. And so now we have this pawn push to h5, attacking the bishop. And so the bishop retreats into this escape hatch, and now we have bishop to d3. And so this fights for control of this important diagonal with black's bishop here on h7. And so black is happy to exchange off this bishop of white's, which was a good bishop because it was on the opposite color squares of white's central pawn here. So white is left with this bad bishop that can be blocked in by its own pawn in the center. And normally black will push forward with e6, and so this bishop would have just been trapped in by its central e-pawn on e6 there. And so it's to black's advantage to exchange this bishop off. And so the queen recaptures the bishop. And now we have this e6 pawn push, setting up a nice defensive structure that you see often in the Carlsen like this. And this move also allows his bishop to potentially move to d6 here and attack the knight and control a central square. So white moves first with this bishop to f4 move, to control the center and this d6 square to prevent the bishop from moving there. And so we have a further developing move by black, getting his other knight out to f6, where it controls important central squares, and it could potentially move to d5, attacking this bishop on f4. And castling queenside by white, as his kingside pawn has been pushed forward. Now white has to castle queenside, and his rook is developed closer to the center of the board, putting more influence on this d file and protecting this d4 pawn. And so now, because the bishop would have been captured if it moved to d6, its only square immediately was to move either to b4, where a pawn could push it away, or this e7 square. And here the bishop is fine, where it will decide later if it can recapture possibly in the future if there are trades here on the f6 square, and it helps to defend the king that's still in the center, although the king is ready to castle kingside. And so we have this knight, which was on g3, kind of off to the side of the board. It moves into the center to gain more power and scope over the central position of the game, and it is attacking this f6 knight. And so we have a queen move here, which is attacking this a pawn, which will force white to make a decision, because white would not want the queen to capture this pawn and break apart this protective cover that the king has. And also there's an attack here with the knight and the queen on this h5 pawn. And so white protects his a2 pawn, keeping his king safe and not allowing the queen to capture. And in this position, black could possibly capture with the knight here on h5. But as we see in the game, as this bishop is lined up on the queen side, black will choose to castle kingside, and he probably felt that by capturing this h-pawn, it may leave an open file for an attack up on the king side. And so instead, black just castles immediately to the king side, getting his king out of the center and relatively more safe behind this pawn cover and knight, and the rook is moved closer to the center. And so here white captures this f6 knight, removing one of the defenders around black's king side. But we have a recapture, replacing the f6 knight and adding a defender around the king. And now knight to e5. So this move takes the knight and places it further in the center, more deeply into black's position, and this knight cannot be chased away unless this knight on f6 moves and the pawn moves forward, which would cause weaknesses in black's position. So this knight will probably be solid here on e5 for a while. And now we have black moving his rook from a8 into the center, pinning this d4 pawn to the queen, which will allow threats such as a pawn push here on c5, attacking, and the pawn would not be able to capture as the queen is in danger here. And so the queen moves to get out of this line of the rook, and also the queen keeps an eye now on this pawn and also lines up here on the center, possibly on this bishop if there were exchanges in the future. And so here we have c5. This pawn, which is off to the side, attacks a central pawn, which is generally the central pawns are more important, and if you have a chance to exchange a central pawn with one from the side, it's usually wise to do so, as it removes this important central pawn which controls the e5 square here and helps protect this knight. And so here, this knight jumped into g6, offering a sacrifice. And also, it is threatening to capture this e7 bishop. And so here, the sacrifice is accepted, but it leaves open a check by the queen here. And so the king will be forced into the corner. And also this bishop is attacked now. And so the king retreats to safety. But here we have, instead of the queen capturing this bishop, we have an h-pawn capturing towards the center, and it opens up this h-file for the rook. And now the rook bears directly down on the king, and we also have this bishop piling up on this h6 pawn. And so black is already starting to fall into trouble here. And we can look at this computer evaluation. White is already ahead, almost 2 pawns worth of material. And so the knight retreats to help defend this h6 pawn. But white crashes through anyway, capturing the pawn. And so now that defensive cover has been removed, and the king is in great danger here. And so with a choice between a knight capture or a pawn capture, black captures with the pawn, but the black king is looking quite vulnerable now. And we have a check after this rook capture. And so the knight captures the rook that was checking the king and removes that attacker. But now the queen captures this bishop finally and threatens a checkmate here on h7. And so this knight move blocks this checkmate threat. And here the pawn captures, getting rid of this defender of the black king. And now the king is wide open and vulnerable here to attack. And also this pawn covers a defensive move of chasing the queen away with the rooks. So the rooks can no longer attack the queen here on e8. Otherwise there'll be a capture with this pawn. And so the king moves down here, trying to get off of this h-file, as the rook could potentially jump in here and begin checking. But instead, the rook now jumps up to this d3 square, and from there it can swing over and harass the black king. And also we have the queen here, which is preventing a possible checkmate threat on white down here on this e1 square. And so black swings up his rook, and from here on d6 it can move over to help block checks by this white rook. And so the rook swings over, checking the king, and there's a block with black's rook, but there are already problems here. And before I go further, I want to step back a few moves and look at this position here where the rook, the black rook, swung down to d6 to help block. In that position, we see before the rook swung down to help protect black's king that already black is in a lot of trouble, but it looks like his best option may have been moving his queen over, and then the game may have continued like this. A rook check, and the queen was swung over here now to protect instead. And here the queen tried to block the check, but it's captured, and now after a king capture, we would have this d5 pawn push here. And so in this position, if this rook were to capture, then we could have a check and a recapture with the queen. Or if this rook would capture here, the queen could capture this rook. So black did not want to play out this position, and so that's probably why instead, once this rook moved up to d3 to swing over and attack the king, instead he brings his rook down and doesn't want to give up his queen, and he's hoping for possible threat here, but it's too late for black. After this check and a block to stop the check, we have a queen check here. And so in this position, black is forced to do something about this checking queen, and he moves the king out of the check, capturing a pawn. But now we have a beautiful finish to this game. A queen check, a block, and checkmate. And this is known as an epaulet mate, as the rooks are on both sides of the king, and the king is trapped as this rook covers the escape squares and the queen is attacking here. Well, I hope you enjoyed that game of Magnus Carlsen playing against Ernst, I hope I pronounced that correctly, in 2004 at Wijk aan Zee in the Netherlands. And I thought it was a very interesting game. This was a young Magnus Carlsen before he was world champion, and he was still improving and would go on to be one of the greatest players, if not the greatest of all time. And so I hope you enjoyed that Every Move Explained chess game with this chess legend Magnus Carlsen. And if you've enjoyed this, please like and subscribe, and feel free to leave comments or suggestions. Thank you and have a great day.